Big yikes, Broncos country. Big yikes. The tight end market in free agency is starting to get thinner and thinner. I want to go ahead and bring in this tweet from Mike Garafolo. Saints tight end Juwan Johnson, who was a top target for the Broncos in free agency, stays in New Orleans on a 3-year deal with a $30.75 million base value and a max value of $34.5 million. He gets $21.25 million guaranteed. So that sucks. Juwan Johnson was the best free agent tight end that was still available that can actually play tight end. Evan Engram is a guy that the Denver Broncos visited with here in Denver at their facility for the past couple of days. But I talked about this in a previous video. Evan Engram, even though he's a tight end by name, he does not really play tight end at all. He's more of a big slot receiver. He's too small to play in line as a tight end. He would get blown up off the line of scrimmage as a blocker if he even tried to get a rep there. So really, he would be filling more the Little Jordan Humphrey role if the Denver Broncos were to bring him in. More of the big inline receiver that you can bring in, a guy who blocks somewhat as a receiver, not as an inline tight end, but you don't want a guy like Evan Engram to play as an inline tight end for you. Juwan Johnson was a little bit smaller, but he proved that he could function as an inline tight end and as a blocker in this system. He could obviously have his advanced route tree still, but the Broncos need a tight end who can be a joker, somebody that you can move around, somebody that you can line up at receiver, line up in line, line up in the slot. And Evan Engram can do some of that stuff, but Juwan Johnson was the more rounded guy who could do pretty much everything that you would need out of a tight end. And unfortunately, the options are starting to get a little bit thin now for the Denver Broncos. I don't hate the idea of bringing in Evan Engram, but I don't want him to count towards the tight end math for the Denver Broncos. I don't. I've also seen people say, well, the Denver Broncos could just go ahead and draft a tight end. They don't need to worry about it. Honestly, if you have a need when you are going into the draft that you need to fill in the draft, that's just not good process because other teams will know that and they will try to jump you in the draft. That's not a good process. You have teams that will go into the draft and they end up getting jumped and the target that they were going after ends up getting taken by another team and that team ends up leaving the draft being screwed. They then have to go out and sign some crap quality free agent off the street that's not a starting caliber player. I've seen the Broncos do this in previous regimes. Under this current regime, really ever since George Paton has gotten here, the Broncos have not done that. You even think about last year when everybody knew that the Broncos had a massive need at quarterback going into the draft. The Broncos, a couple days before the draft, just in case they were not able to get their guy, Bo Nix, they went and made a trade for Zach Wilson just so that way they could put some putty in the massive hole in the boat that was leaking water. That way at least the boat wouldn't sink. The Broncos need to approach things like that in this tight end room before they go into the draft. They cannot go into the draft with everybody and their mother knowing that they need a tight end because they're probably going to get jumped, and with the Broncos' luck, they probably wouldn't end up with any one of the top tight ends in the draft. So no Tyler Warren or Colston Loveland. The Broncos need to bring in at least a halfway decent free agent tight end, and that does not include Evan Engram. Evan Engram, I will say again, is not a tight end. He is a big slot receiver. Who is a tight end that could be available on the free agent market, though? There are a couple of guys that are at least functional that I would definitely consider, and the top one on my list is Tyler Conklin coming over from the New York Jets. 29 years old, so not the oldest tight end in the world. He actually has some ties with George Paton. George Paton was the assistant GM of the Vikings when Tyler Conklin came into Minnesota back in 2018. I can't remember if he was a late round draft pick or if he was an undrafted free agent. I cannot remember. Oh, I can look right here actually. He was a 5th-round draft pick by the Vikings. So George Paton knows Tyler Conklin quite well, and he was very, very solid last year for the Jets. Almost 500 yards receiving and 4 touchdowns. That's better than what the Broncos have had this past year at the tight end position, and he can be a functional blocker for you. So Tyler Conklin is probably my top target now for the Denver Broncos at tight end. You can still bring in Evan Engram. You can still draft a tight end, maybe even in the 1st round, but bringing in Tyler Conklin at least puts some putty in the massive hole in the boat, so that way the boat doesn't sink before you get to draft night. It's definitely not the greatest strategy in the world. I mean, Tyler Conklin is not the best tight end out there, but it's probably your best option now considering that all the best free agent tight ends have been picked over. The Broncos need to add somebody into that room, and they need to add somebody who can be a functional tight end, not just a big slot receiver. Tyler Conklin makes sense. Mo Alley Cox also makes sense, but I think Tyler Conklin is probably my top target at this point in time. Hell, I wouldn't even be opposed to bringing back Eric Saubert, quite frankly. I thought Saubert was a perfectly functional tight end for the Broncos when he played here. I would totally bring him back, but with Juwan Johnson now off the board, that is a big blow to the Denver Broncos. Alright guys, be sure to leave a like on this video as well as subscribe and ring the bell so these videos appear in your notification feed. And let me know in the comment section below, guys, what do you think the Denver Broncos should do now that their options are pretty limited to address the tight end position? Do you think that they need to at least add a stopgap in free agency, or are you okay with them risking going into the draft with not addressing that position with the possibility that they might come out of the draft without a starting caliber tight end at all? Drop those comments down below, guys. I would love to hear from you as always. And until next time, guys, I'm your host, Gage Madrid, saying peace out.